places. I am going to do a brief introduction to all these three speakers. They happen to be all from scientific background and happen to be all civil rights activists also, science activists also. Gauhar Raza Saab is a former chief scientist at CSIR, Council of Scientific Industrial Research, a civil rights activist, a poet, a documentary filmmaker on social and scientific issues. He happens to be my almost same contemporary at Aligarh. He did his engineering from there, and then moved to IIT Delhi to do his MTech. He was active then as a student leader. I remember him very well. His father was very active, very close to Professor Irfan Habib and all that group. So welcome, Raza Saab. You are not unknown to us. And obviously,
thanks a lot.
Professor Pervez Hoodboy doesn't need any introduction, I guess, but still, I'll say that he's a very well-known, eminent physicist from Pakistan, a very prominent public intellectual, civil rights activist, author, columnist, and he did his nuclear physics, PhD in nuclear physics from MIT, in, I guess, 1977, 78, and then moved to do a couple of postdocs, University of Washington, and then moved to Quaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad and did professorship there for a long time. And he's still there. Professor Ravi Sinha is also from MIT, a PhD from MIT. He's a theoretical physicist. I think in nuclear physics he did his PhD. He was a couple of years junior to Pervez Hoodboy there, and they met there and probably did some activities also there. He's an educationist, full-time science communicator, author, scholar. After having professorship at IIT Ahmedabad or University of Gujarat, and then he moved to Delhi, I guess, and he's continuously lecturing everywhere on science and reason and all that. So let's start. The format is like Gauhar Raza Saab will lead this what you call a sort of detailed introduction or whatever thought processes he thinks that why we are what we are, why this lack of excellence in our societies. And then Pervez Hoodboy Saab will detail it or whatever way he wants to do it. And Professor Ravi Sinha will try to conclude. This will be finished within 1 hour, and then we will be doing the question and answer session moderated by Dr. Rafat Hussain. So welcome, Gauhar Raza Saab. Floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you very much, Hi Razi. I'm really, truly honored to be part of this discussion for many reasons, but the most important reason is that the two scientists, the first-rate scientist, Professor Ravi and Professor Pervez Hoodboy, both of them are dear friends, but I have no claim to be of that stature. However, I have tried to understand what is the scientific temper debate all about and why it was necessary for India. You've asked me to give a little bit of introduction, so I'll get into a little bit of history of this entire debate as well. There is nothing unique about Indian civilization as such when it comes to debate and discussion on rationality. It goes back to antiquity, and we see the very strong undercurrents of rational thought and definition, even the definition of rationality in the debates, philosophical and religious debate, including the skepticism that are there in shlokas of Rigveda. And later on, we know that Jainism as well as Buddhism have debated the question of rationality. Especially one of the most famous quotations of Buddha, where he says, don't believe on anything just because your teacher has told you, or just because it has been passed on as a traditional thought, or just because many people repeat something, or it has been read in a text. Unless and until you have judged it yourself, don't believe in it. And once you have judged it, once you have thought it to be correct and true, then use it for the greater good of humanity. These are these trends, undercurrents in the debate, which have been strong in almost every civilization, and it's true for Indian civilization as well. But when modern ideas started coming, especially after French Revolution, then a lot of these things were re-debated and reincarnated in various civilizations. Once the idea of secularism, especially, that was debated and also passed on and became a part of the larger thought structure of not only scientific community, but greater society, then secularism was a concept that was equivalent to what we know as scientific temper, at least in Europe. When these ideas started flowing into other and invading into other cultures, they were received in different ways. Various cultures, including Chinese, Indian, or Arab culture, reacted to these ideas in various ways. In India, the greatest vehicle of these ideas was our freedom movement. The society was very regressive. The society was divided completely. And it was only the oppression of the British imperialism which cemented and united the Indian subcontinent. The people were reacting to what they experienced as a result of the oppressive force of the imperialist forces. In my opinion, this reaction to the imperialist oppression was brewing up, and it brewed and matured over a period of time. And the idea of secularism itself got transformed in the face of divisive policies that Britishers adopted in the country to rule this part of the world. They tried to divide Indian society across all kinds of fault lines, and there were fault lines. There were cultural fault lines, linguistic fault lines, the pehnawa, the khan-pan, the language. Even today, for me, I've been arguing, Tamil and Telugu is like French or Chinese or Japanese language. It's so different that I don't know even one word of these languages. So there were fault lines all across, including the fault line of religious cultures that were spread over the subcontinent. And Hindu and Muslim contradiction was accentuated. The fault line was thickened by them very actively. There is evidence that they promoted it and allocated funds to sow the seeds of hatred among these two major populations in the country. I think the reaction of Indians was that there is something called Sarva Dharma Sambhav, respect for all religions, and that became synonym with secularism. The debate among the budding scientific community, which over a period of time again matured and enlarged, went on for about 90 years. And here is a person, a young person, not very young person, who is a politician, who starts writing a book. He is in jail in 1945, and I'm talking about Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. And he writes this book, which is a wonderful reading itself. If you have not read it, then there is a problem with you, because you should read the book, if not for anything else, but the beauty of the language itself. And he devotes about 10, 15 pages to scientific temper. In 1946, this book is published. India gets freedom in 1947. It's divided. It's bruised all over. There's bloodshed. And Nehru has realized even before that Gandhi and others have appropriated the word secularism and have diluted it and have reduced it to Sarv Dharma Sambhav. This phrase occurs many times in the book, in his book. I think that the research tells us that this phrase was first used at the last decade of 18th century in the literature in Europe, in English language. But it was very different usage that was prevalent. It did not recur. The frequency is very, very low in literature. And people almost in Europe forgot it. Nehru must have heard it, but a lot of scholars say that he invented it in India. However, whatever may be the reason, he had to talk about in this book about scientific temper. What does he say in the book? At one place, he says that, and I'm quoting Nehru, the application of science are inevitable and unavoidable for all countries and people today. But something more than its application is necessary. It is the scientific approach, the adventure, and yet critical temper of science, the search for truth and new knowledge, the refusal to accept anything without testing and trial, the capacity to change previous conclusions in the face of new evidence, the reliance on observed facts and not on preconceived theory, the hard discipline of mind. All this is necessary, not merely for the application of science, but for the life itself and the solutions of its many problems. Too many scientists today who swear by science forget all about it outside their particular sphere. So for Nehru, the definition of scientific temper is old secular word. It's replacement of almost old secular word in India, which he repeatedly popularized. Let me again visit this particular definition which he is given. For him, scientific temper is adventurous yet critical temper, refusal to accept anything without testing, capacity to change previous conclusions, the reliance on observed fact and not preconceived notion, and hard discipline of mind. This is, I think, a complete and most beautiful definition of scientific temper, as far as I am concerned. He also says that the century is century of those who will make friends with science. he also says, and this is also a beautiful definition, a one-line definition, where he says that scientific temper is the temper of a free man. What does it mean? A man cannot be free unless and until he has scientific temper. And it's only scientific temper which can bring freedom. Nehru is talking about scientific temper in a society where the literacy level is only 30%. The other amazing thing about Nehru is that Nehru is a politician. He is not a scientist. Somehow, a politician gives the best definition of scientific temper in a country. And he keeps on repeating in a society where the level of literacy is so low. Why did he do it? I've been asking this question myself. Because Nehru realizes that scientific temper is a project which is a political project. It is not only a scientific project. Though scientific information, knowledge of scientific tenets, laws, etc., these are important for him as well. But scientific temper goes beyond scientific knowledge. And therefore, we have definition of scientific temper from a politician instead of scientist. If we consider this to be a correct understanding that scientific temper is a political project rather than only a scientific project, then we have to also accept that constructing a scientific society, as Nehru says, requires application of scientific knowledge, scientific laws, scientific method, and scientific worldview beyond the four walls of laboratory. This is, again, I'm quoting Nehru, that scientific temper is application of scientific knowledge beyond the four walls of a laboratory. What does that mean? That ultimately, unless and until the entire population is scientifically tempered, science cannot flourish in a country. Maybe some islands and ivory towers could be made, but doing good science, doing science which can benefit the society, is necessary for doing good science. So it's a dialectical kind of relationship between them. If you don't have acceptance of science in a society, then of course you cannot have great scientific inventions and discoveries. Unless you have discoveries and inventions, you cannot also build up a society which is scientifically tempered society. And therefore, when India gets freedom, these 10 pages from his book become extremely important for scientific community. They grab the opportunity and they carry forward the entire discussion. A large number of workshops, conferences are held in various parts of the country, including in Delhi. And each one advances the understanding of scientific temper, with the result that in 1958, India becomes the first country in the world to pass something called scientific policy resolution. Now, this scientific policy resolution itself is an amazing thing that happens in India, because once the draft is ready, it is placed in the parliament. Normally, what happens is that when you have a resolution or you want to pass a bill or something, then it is given a number, it is given a title, and it is circulated, and somebody who is presenting it or introducing it will rise and say that this is under discussion. And it's 99% probability that it will be torn apart by the opposition. They'll ask, change this word, change this phrase, do this thing, do that.
Only
No.
5 minutes left for you. Only
Yeah.
5 minutes. 5
Yeah,
minutes.
I'm winding up. I'm just winding up.
Sorry for that.
In this particular case, Nehru, who is the prime minister of the country, he rises and says each and every word of this resolution has to be read because it is important for the future of the country. And every word is read. It's a long resolution, not a very short one. And after that, opposition accuses Nehru's government that why did you delay bringing it to the parliament? If you had brought it earlier, then 2 rolling plans would not have been unsuccessful. They also accuse the government not to take note of the Kumbh Mela that was happening in Allahabad, where a lot of myths and superstitions were being spread. Today in our country, we cannot even think of such a debate happening in the parliament. The point that I'm trying to make is that those forces which were against scientific temper, which was against a secular constitution of the country, are asserting themselves. During this period, the gap between the people and scientific community has increased. Scientific temper itself is intensely under attack after 2014. And therefore, to expect that India would do wonders in science, field of science, they have done in certain areas. I think Pervez Saab gives a much longer rope to Indian scientific community than we do. But yes, in certain areas we have done and excelled in certain ways, done very well and excelled. But generally to accept that India will churn out excellent scientists in every field and will win Nobel prizes every year would be a tall order. In a society where scientific temper has been under attack right through, it is very difficult to do what we have been able to achieve. And it's remarkable that we have achieved a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Gauhar Raza Saab. Thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting. We have to cover the entire panel. Now I invite our eminent speaker, Dr. Pervez Hoodboy, to go for another 20 minutes. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I'm not eminent. I'm just a very ordinary scientist. I send you greetings, everyone, from Islamabad. It's 9:28 over here. I listened to Gauhar, my friend, very intently. Agree with most of what he said. Where I have differences, I will shortly say where they are. There's absolutely no argument that science is universal, that it is an expression of human rationality, and that many, many different cultures have done science, and they've done it well, or they've done it to different degrees. In the time that I spent outside Pakistan, and those were my very formative years, I learned that science can be done beautifully by everybody. And it doesn't matter whether they are Americans, with whom I personally interacted with the most because, of course, my thesis advisor, many of my initial collaborators were American. But then I also worked with Chinese friends, and I found that their thinking in matters of science were identical. This is my personal experience, but then, of course, it stretches all the way across scientists of every kind and the very great ones too. Srinivasan Ramanujan, who is the legendary mathematician of India, who discovered formulas that left European mathematicians bewildered, used to say that his inspiration came from the goddess Kali, or it came from some goddess whose name I can't remember right now, maybe somebody else will remember, and that the goddess used to place these formulas which still mystify people, mathematicians of the highest caliber. The goddess used to place these formulas on his tongue and he merely had to spit them out. Of course, Ramanujan is of 100 years ago, but Abdus Salam, who got the Nobel Prize and who I got to know rather well, and in fact, he wrote the preface to my book on Islam and science as well. He too used to claim that his inspiration for unifying the forces of electromagnetism and the weak interaction came from the Quran and from looking at the architectural constructs like the Badshahi Masjid in Lahore. Perhaps, but then when I was in Trieste and got to know him a bit and we got talking, I asked him, I said, Professor Salam, how is it that you, as a believing Muslim, arrived at the same theory, the SU2 cross 1 group theory, which unifies the interactions, whereas Steven Weinberg, with whom I had taken courses at MIT, did it at the same time. And Weinberg is an atheist. He's a Jewish atheist. So at that time, we weren't friendly enough. I mean, Salam and I. But later on, when I asked him for his preface, for him to write the preface, and I didn't think he would write the preface to my book, but he did, he explicitly addressed this issue and said that Pervez Hoodboy asked me this question, and I say that in matters of science, it doesn't matter. All that matters is the way in which you do science, the results that you arrive at, and their testability. So it's I think, it doesn't even need to be told that all scientists are held responsible by the quality of their work, the results at which they have arrived, and the degree to which they hold up. So today, I'm happy to see that India is prospering, doing very well, and unlike Gauhar, I'm actually very impressed by how far India has progressed. We see the best works in theoretical physics happening at various institutions in India, including TIFR, which I happened to visit twice. I see that the Indian space program is doing very well. Biotechnology is prospering. The work done in creating computer software has made India a major exporter of software. I think something like 130 and 140 billion dollars per year. And I am happy to see this. I also think that a lot of the credit goes to Jawaharlal Nehru, though not to him alone, certainly, for having emphasized the scientific temper, which set India on the path of scientific development, which in a way sanctified science for the Indian public and set it as a goal. I think that this is perhaps a very important element in differentiating the paths that India took and Pakistan took, where today the poverty of science in every field is palpable. It stares you in the face. There's so little to show that it's heartrending. Now, Gauhar said that the Enlightenment thought that arrived from Europe through the colonialists, through the British, was received differently between different communities in the Indian subcontinent, and he's absolutely right. Now, here is what really made the difference. The absorption was much greater among Hindus as compared to Muslims, and there is a historical reason for that. There are cultural reasons for that. And so I think we need to explore these rather than say that it is just the British which created the divisions between peoples. The difference in cultural absorption has to be understood. Let me say, first of all, that of course, science is the expression of human rationality, but rationality was not absent in the Muslim tradition. Rationality, while it was the dominant way of thinking among the Muslim ruling classes between the 9th and the 13th century, was entirely why in those times there was rapid scientific progress. This is the reason why there are some very great Muslim scientists known in history, people like Al-Khwarizmi, who invented the idea of algorithm, of Ibn al-Hasham, who discovered the phenomena of refraction and of the principle of least action as applied to light, the fact that light takes the path which takes the shortest time, etc. Those were very important results, and it is really Islamic. It is really the efforts of Muslims which made the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution in Europe, possible, or perhaps easier. We never know. We can never say for sure what would have happened if the Muslim step in between the Greeks and modern thought had not existed. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe it would have taken much longer, who knows. But the fact that there was a rationalist tradition in Muslims made that era possible. And that rationalist tradition was actually taken from somewhere else. It was taken from the Greeks. So in fact, the way that science was introduced into Islam came through Greek thought. And so when shortly after the Prophet's death in 637, 638, Islam started spreading, and it spread to those areas where there were big treasures of Greek writings, of the works of people like Aristotle, Plato, Democritus, Anaximander, etc. And it's from there that science, through translation of Greek into Arabic, actually entered Islamic civilization. And then it died out. It died out after a good long time, something like 4 centuries or so. Now, that never, unfortunately, that spirit of rationalism never reached the Indian subcontinent. And so we do not see the kind of inquisitiveness, the curiosity, the thing the essence of science, which is asking questions, how, what, why. We didn't see that or saw it to a very diminished level in Mughal civilization. And so it did not become part of Muslim culture. Of course, there were other parts of Muslim culture that I think are very beautiful: the music, the poetry, the architecture. But here is where Muslim thought on the subcontinent was severely deficient. And so when the British came along, they found that there was much more fertile ground to be found among Hindus, especially those who had gone, or I should say, among those who were willing to change their minds and move on. And so I think people like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, the Brahmo Samaj, etc., played a magnificent role in changing the mindset of the Hindu orthodoxy. People like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, who tried to change the mindset of the Muslim orthodoxy, had a very limited effect. They did have some, and in fact, one should not discount that. But it is that differential development which then is really the cause of today India progressing relative to Pakistan. Now, this, to me, is a wake-up call for Pakistanis. So for decades now, this has been what I have felt is the most important message that I learned during my encounters with scientists in the West, and of course my friends in India, to insist that there cannot be scientific and technological development in Pakistan unless there is a change of mindset. It's the mindset that matters. And so, although we've had people here who have advocated spending vast amounts of money on universities, and they did. In fact, I would say that Pakistan has kind of set a record. That's because between 2002 and 2010, the funding for higher education increased by 1,200%. There was an incredible amount of equipment that was imported. There were buildings that were constructed for universities. There was so much stuff, scientific equipment imported, that it's unbelievable. I would have PhD students knocking at my door saying they want to do a PhD with me because if I take them on as a student, I'll get 5,000 rupees a month extra and they'll get their stipends. And so the money was flowing like crazy. But now, 20 years later, there's so little to show for it. That's because the mindset wasn't there. The scientific temper wasn't there. So there's no doubt in my mind that Jawaharlal Nehru was key to India's progress, particularly because he came at a time of when India was in its formative stage. I just wonder how India would have fared had it been Narendra Modi at that time, and he's talking about transplants of Prabhu Ganesh's nose onto humans or whatever, and surgical implants being carried out and spacecraft traveling between Mars and Earth. I don't think India would have been where it is today had Modi been there at that time. Fortunately for India, there was a period of maturity, and now, because it is mature to an extent, it is able to not self-destruct because of Hindutva forces asserting themselves. So even if they do damage it somewhat, am still hopeful that there will be enough resilience within India to survive this. I am not so confident about Pakistan. The forces of religious backwardness, of religious fanaticism seem to be growing by the day. And this is something that should alarm all Pakistanis. It alarms some, but not enough of them. This is a fight that we've got to fight, because it's really a fight for survival as a decent nation. Else, what's the alternative? That we become Afghanistan. Afghanistan is such a sad story. Nobody endorses foreign occupation. The Americans shouldn't have gone in there in the first place. But once they did go in there, they were trying to set up a system. And by the way, just a little while ago, I looked at Afghan textbooks written for Afghan kids in school, and they were written by USAID experts or whoever. There are no names on them, there are no authors on them. And I was comparing those books. By the way, they're written in Pashto and in Farsi, and I can barely make that out, but they're written in the Urdu script. So I still can understand a lot of common words. And of course, one can look at the exercises, one can look at the math and so forth, and you can tell that there's such a huge difference of quality between those textbooks and the textbooks that we have here in Pakistan. It's heartrending how the rulers of Pakistan have so misunderstood the nature of science, and they have simply thought that science is just a collection of facts, a bunch of formula to be memorized, diagrams to be reproduced in examinations. They don't know about the scientific method. They don't know that science requires rigor, proof, logic. Those are the very foundations on which science stands. And so it's ultimately the leadership. Well, of course, you say that one knows that the leadership emerges from the people themselves. And so the problem becomes doubly difficult when you have a leadership that doesn't understand and a people who have over the years not been encouraged to understand. So the fight is much harder in Pakistan than it is in India. I'm not saying that you have an easy fight there to establish the scientific temper, but ours is harder. But of course, looking at it from over the time scale of history, how long did it take for Europe to exit the Dark Ages and enter the Enlightenment? Centuries. But then things started moving faster, very fast. And now the exponential growth of science bewilders us. What are we to do with artificial intelligence, with quantum computation, with the tinkering of genes that allows us to make practically anything, etc., etc. So I'll just end over here saying that we do have common problems between India and Pakistan, but more and more we are growing apart. There is some grounds for optimism. There are a lot of young kids in Pakistan who are seeing through the propaganda, the religious fanaticism that puts blinders onto them. They're not a mass of them, but because of their exposure to the world outside through social media, through the internet, through distance learning courses. Maybe there will be, the next time we speak, I may be a little more optimistic. So thanks very much.
MashaAllah. Wonderful and very, very honest description of what is going on. It will be our friend Ravi Sinha Saab's job now to do the concluding thought process that where we are going and how we are taking it, this situation from the subcontinent into a competitive or stage. In spite of all the degrees we are holding, we are no match from where I am sitting. So how we are going? You are the communicator. Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Yeah.
Thank you, Raji Sahab. First a correction, I never became a professor. I am not a practicing physicist anymore. I quit doing physics just a few years after my PhD. So that's just because you keep calling me professor. So I thought that I'll make this correction. It doesn't make a difference to what I have to say this evening. I must begin by thanking you and the Indian diaspora in Washington, DC for giving me this opportunity. It's an honor for me to share the dais, even if virtually, with Pervez, Hoodboy and Gauhar Raza. I am going to kind of disappoint you because I am not going to try concluding what the other two speakers have said. They are so eloquent that I don't want to spoil their eloquence and their clarity by my conclusions. I have a few thoughts of my own to say, and I was kind of stressed about Raji Sahab being a very stern timekeeper. So, and when I speak, I go here and there. So I wrote down some notes so that I keep within time. The problem is that when I wrote the notes, I didn't know what Pervez and Gauhar would have to say. So maybe part of what I say will be redundant in the light of what they have already said, or partly it will also be tangential. But I will read basically the few points that I have jotted down, and if reading appears very awkward to you, the audience, then blame it on Razi Sahab. Let me first get some elementary considerations out of the way. The title refers to the land of Bose, Raman, and Salam, which might betray an assumption that a scientist is guaranteed to possess scientific temper, and he is influential enough to leave an imprint on the society. In an ideal world, perhaps that ought to be the case, but even scientists do not live in an ideal world. Take the example of Sir Isaac Newton, the greatest icon of science, whose genius did put its final and authoritative seal on the scientific revolution. Running away from plague in Cambridge to his native village, this young and solitary scholar single-handedly laid the foundation of modern science. He accomplished this during a mere 18 months of his Annae Mirabilis of 1665-66, when he formulated his laws of motion and his theory of gravitation. In addition, he also invented calculus during the same months. But after that, he devoted a large part of his long life to the practice of alchemy and to the theological labors of interpreting the Bible. He denounced what he thought were corruptions of Christianity, like Trinitarianism, and adopted a radically puritanical version of Arianism that considered the Bible as an exact revelation about the future. Nothing in Newton was of normal proportions, neither his scientific genius nor his rigid dogmatism and confident superstitions. If you think I am being unfair to Newton, after all, he could only be a product of his times, you are already conceding part of the point I am driving at. But let me cite a few more examples from more recent times before I try to peep into the relationship between science and scientific temper. Pascual Jordan, a pioneer of quantum mechanics, was an active Nazi, and he continued to hold his fascist views even after his rehabilitation in post-war Germany. Physics Nobel laureates Philip Leonard and Johannes Stark too were active Nazis and confirmed anti-Semites. A little earlier, the great mathematician Emmy Noether had been prevented from becoming a faculty in the mathematics department of the University of Göttingen just because she was a woman. An exasperated David Hilbert famously said, "I do not see that the sex of the candidate is an argument against her admission as a privatdozent. After all, we are a university, not a bathhouse," end quote. And a scientist friend of mine reminded me the other day that our own C.V. Raman, one in the title of this program, was opposed to a woman being admitted as a PhD student because, in his views, women were unfit to do science. I am not here to withhold the certificate of scientific temper being awarded to eminent scientists. My purpose is to examine whether lack of scientific temper comes in the way of doing good science. Pervez has already mentioned it, but I have written it without knowing that he will bring it up. Pervez Hoodboy wrote a book some 30 years ago. The book is called Islam and Science, and the subtitle is Religious Orthodoxy and Battle for Rationality. In the book, he cites a telling example. Steven Weinberg and Abdus Salam, the same Salam who too is in the title of the program today, came up with one of the greatest physical theories of 20th century, the unified quantum theory of electromagnetism and the weak nuclear force. They invented this theory independently of each other and shared a Nobel Prize for it. Weinberg was as Pervez said, Weinberg was an avowed atheist. Salam was self-confessedly a believer. Salam wrote the foreword to Pervez's book in which he concurs with the author that being a believer made no difference one way or the other to his coming up with the theory. So there you have it from the horse's mouth. What then is the relationship between science and scientific temper? The scientist does not live by science alone. Even a scientist's mind is not entirely colonized by scientific reason. I do not know if, like the brain, the mind too has two separate but interconnected lobes. But allow me to use a simple-minded metaphor. Scientific temper, it seems to me, has something to do with the rational side of the mind trying to influence the emotional side. This may give rise to a reasonable and cultivated individual, but it can also result in disaster. With the rational side meddling too much with the emotional side, it may give rise to a rather childish adult, if not a veritable Dr. Strangelove. Scientific temper is a tricky business. It involves a very intricate game between reason and culture. Neither side of the game we understand very well. There are those who think that reason is transparent, whereas culture harbors dark corners. The opposing side points out that this is a false picture. It labors to show that reason has murky origins. It did not result from an immaculate conception. And it is not at all self-aware. It does not know that it is inextricably entangled in structures of power. Which side is more important for a successful and at the same time a meaningful life? Which side should sit in judgment? It is a debate that is hard to settle. There are funny episodes, for example, of scientists sitting in judgment over poetry. Paul Dirac, one of the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century, once told young J.R. Oppenheimer, another great scientist and polymath, and I quote, "I don't see how you can work on physics and write poetry at the same time. In science, you want to say something nobody knew before in words that everyone can understand. In poetry, you are bound to say something that everybody already knows in words that nobody can understand." The judgments of poets about science, on the other hand, are usually not so funny. They are often much darker, prone to denouncing the supposed soullessness of science or mocking it as one mocks the childishness of a grown-up. With this much as a background, let me now come to the topic of the day. I do agree with the assertion that scientific temper is largely missing from the societies and cultures that form a distinct civilization on the subcontinent. But I am less surprised that it is missing despite scientists like Bose, Raman, and Salam. I am more surprised that it is missing despite someone like Jawaharlal Nehru. Jawaharlal Nehru has come up, not surprisingly, in both the speakers have mentioned him, and underlined him, and I'm going to do so too. To my mind, Nehru was the best and the wisest proponent of the desirability of scientific temper. Let me quote a passage from the Discovery of India, even if it consumes a precious minute. Science deals, quote, "Science deals with the domain of positive knowledge, but the temper which it should produce goes beyond that domain. The ultimate purpose of man may be said to be to gain knowledge, to realize truth, to appreciate goodness and beauty. The scientific method of objective inquiry is not applicable to all these, and much that is vital in life seems to lie beyond its scope, such as the sensitivity to art and poetry, the emotion that beauty produces, the inner recognition of goodness. The botanist and the zoologist may never experience the charm and beauty of nature. The sociologist may be wholly lacking in love for humanity. But even when we visit the mountain tops where philosophy dwells and high emotions fill us, or gaze at the immensity beyond, that approach and temper, namely scientific temper, are still necessary," end quote. I might also add that Indian Constitution is the only constitution in the world which prescribes developing scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform as a fundamental duty of every citizen. All this, however, may sound too philosophical and too idealistic. How can one be sure that scientific temper really matters to a society or a civilization? I think history has provided a very real example. Let me dwell on it for a minute. Pervez's book that I have already mentioned opens with a parable of a team of Martian anthropologists visiting Earth sometime between 9th and 13th of century. And I'm going to use his words in this paragraph. I am not going to announce each time quote and end quote. They find that the civilization with greatest promise is the Islamic civilization with its Baitul Hikmah, astronomical observatories, hospitals, and schools. Then they visit again towards the end of 20th century and find that their earlier prediction turned out to be wrong. The part of humanity which once seemed to offer the greatest promise now appears inescapably trapped in a state of frozen medievalism, rejecting the new and clinging desperately to the old. Pervez's words. On the other hand, the former retrogrades have climbed the evolutionary ladder and are now aiming for the stars. Was this stunning reversal of roles, asked the visitors, the mere misfortune of one and the good fortune of the other? Was it due to invasions and military defeats? Was it the result of a fundamental shift in outlook and attitudes? End of Pervez's words. With minor variations, the parable may apply equally well to the fate of the subcontinent. If the Martians were to visit here sometime during the 17th century, they would be dazzled by the Navratnas, the 9 jewels in Akbar's court, and they would marvel at the fact that the subcontinent accounted for nearly 1/3 of the total world production. However, on their second visit at the turn of the millennium, they would be equally disappointed with this civilization. Perhaps the real question to ask is, why and how did the West pull ahead? That may shed easy light on why everyone else got left behind. That answer is obvious, but like the case of the elephant in the room, there have been reasons for ignoring the obvious. Looking for deeper causalities behind the long trajectories of history may no longer be the intellectual flavor of the day. After all, this is the era of suspicions about grand narratives. We who got left behind can derive satisfaction from the all-round denunciations of colonialism and imperialism and attribute all that we suffer from to their crimes. We may rejoice in those in the high chairs in the Western academia are raising an intellectual storm against science and modernity, which supposedly have been nothing but handmaidens of capitalism and imperialism. The post-colonial theorist may continue to uncover sinister doings of the long-dead colonialism. But someday we will have to ask, what is in it for us on the subcontinent? These critics are definitely making the Western societies better, more cultivated, more democratic, and more multicultural. But they already had science and modernity. They had already pulled ahead. How should we find our path out of poverty and superstition? What kind of future should we visualize for ourselves? Explanations about why and how did the West pull ahead fill entire libraries. But in some ways, the answer is too obvious. West did it with the help of science and modernity. Of course, both were born along with capitalism and colonialism, but one should not throw the baby with the bathwater. It is truly astonishing that there exist high theories declaring that all claims of science about universal truths, objectivity, and uniqueness of scientific method are false. That all cultures, communities in all ages had equally valid claims to knowledge and method. In India, a simple way has been found to support such theories. All one has to do is to claim that everything that modern science has accomplished and will ever accomplish is already there in the Vedas. In any case, West did not accomplish the miracle of great divergence only through capitalism and industrial revolution. Enlightenment and modernity played an equally important role. I have already referred to the complex interaction between science and culture. In the 18th century, Western Europe, this imparted an added acceleration to history. And it took nearly 2 centuries after the advent of modern science for scientific temper to seep into Western culture. Enlightenment was the name given to this process of seeping in. Enlightenment and modernity cannot just be imported or imitated. This is because of the fact that science is one, but cultures are many. All cultures must find their own ways to imbibe science and animate modernity. Among those who were left behind, there have been a few successful examples of catching up with the West. Soviet Union used to be one such example, but it collapsed. Russia, in any case, was too close to the European civilization to count as a distinctive example. In the East, Japan earlier and China now have been such examples. What has stopped the subcontinent from being another such example? This too is an enormous subject and extraordinarily complex one. It is said that fools rush in where angels fear to tread. But let me rush in nevertheless. Among many millennial historical processes that have gone into the making of a distinct civilization on the subcontinent, one is special and unique. Elements of it may be found in other lands, but on the subcontinent, it has played a role like no other place on the planet. This, in my opinion, has been the single largest obstacle to scientific temper seeping into our culture. Let me conclude by pointing a finger at it. I am alluding to the fact that nearly all religions on the subcontinent took, in varying degrees, a mystical devotional form comprising of numerous sects led by gurus, peers, mahatmas, and other godmen, all engaged in the task of paving a plebeian road for a direct access to God, without mediation of priests or books or other intermediaries. On the Hindu side, it emerged in the South, I mean South India, as the Bhakti movement and spread to the north in the second millennium. On the Muslim side, it made its way through Afghanistan to the northwest of India and spread through Sufis, dervishes, and peers. The phenomenon also gave rise to a new religion, Sikhism. It is this phenomenon of bhakti, Sufism, Sikhism, and assorted mystical devotional movements that is at the heart of a distinct civilization on the subcontinent. This phenomenon has been judged favorably by nearly everyone. It has won praises from the religious and the non-religious, from traditionalists and modernists, from the right wing as well as from the left wing. Nearly everyone prefers heterodoxy to orthodoxy. There is no denying that in many ways it has contributed positively to the culture and civilization on the subcontinent. And yet there is a very large negative fallout that has been largely ignored. This phenomenon triggers processes that obstruct the advance of scientific temper and modernity. It encourages blind faith at the cost of a genuine sense of wonder, prevents religiosity from turning genuinely into spiritual and becoming philosophical, prevents the philosophical from being reason, prevents reason from seeping into culture. It has been the principal vehicle of unreason, blind faith, and superstition in our part of the world. George Orwell once said, saints should always be judged guilty until proven innocent. An ironical meaning to this has been added in today's India, where godmen do not lose their followers even after being convicted as rapists and murderers. Even Nehru fails to grapple with the civilizational consequences of Bhakti movement. He harbors contradictions. He admires Vivekananda, Rabindranath Tagore, Gandhi, Bhagat Singh, and Einstein all at the same time. Nehru was a great man, a visionary, a leader, a thinker, a statesman. Like Whitman, he could perhaps say, I am large, I contain multitudes. He failed because the weight of the past was too heavy. He could speak bare truths. He could not speak bare truths because he had to carry his people along. That is why sometimes you need to listen to small men too. They can speak the bare truth as they are spared the onerous task of carrying Nehru's burden. This is where I will stop. Thank you.
MashaAllah, Zabardast, and really you did a wonderful job. And sorry if I have somehow made you feel like, I was pushing, but you made my job very difficult because you took on Sufis and Bhaktis, and my next announcement is right on that subject. So anyway, so we learned a lot. And before we go to see how we learn, here is coming week, Ravi Sahab, sometimes you have to sit and see what Sufis and Bhakti movement say. They are irrational in that sense, scientific sense. Nonetheless, for your heart, a little bit, such things are needed. So this is coming week. Danish Akbar is presenting Dastan Sufi Buzurgon ki. Now it is going to be over to Dr. Rafat Hussain, our host, who will moderate the question and answer session, and he will take care about that. I'm sure there will be many questions. So over to you, Rafat. Rafat? Dr. Rafat Hussain? This is the third call.
Unmute.
Rafat? This is
Okay, I had a sorry about that. I had a difficulty in unmuting myself. But anyway, so Razi bhai, this is the poster for the next, not the Mushaira event organized by the Legal Alumni Association of Washington, DC. I have shared the clickable link in the chat if you are interested. This is on this coming Sunday at 11 o'clock.
okay.
And this will be a virtual event.
Thank you.
Okay, so coming back to our lectures and the speakers.
And
So
be
I like
careful-
to thank,
Be careful, there are a lot of scientists into that. So you have to be more smarter than them.
I already had my comments, so I can't remove this anymore. Okay, so I was not sharing the screen first. I think so, but anyway, now this is the poster. And this is for the coming Sunday at 11 o'clock. This event is organized by Aligarh Alumni Association of Washington, DC. And so please attend if you have interest in Shairi and poetry. Okay. So coming back to our speakers, and so I would like to thank the Gauhar Raza Saab, Professor Pervez Hoodboy Saab, and Dr. Ravi Sinha Saab. So that was a wonderful, wonderful experience, at least being a scientist. So you know that there are two options of asking the question or for the comments. So one is either you show your interest in raising the digital hand or in a chat box. So let me see if there is a yes. I know that it will generate a lot of interest. So first person is Satyanath Chaudhary Saab. Go ahead, unmute yourself, Satyanath Saab. Razi bhai, can they unmute themselves? Razi bhai.
Yes, I did. Okay.
Okay.
Now they can unmute yourself. Yes.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Thank you very much. Yeah, I had two questions. One is I was so impressed by Sinha Saab's presentation. I would love to read some books or something that he has written. So would he please leave the names of his books in the chat box or say it to us? And if we could get his email address also, that would be a way of.
Satyanath Saab, be brief, please, with the question only. We cannot afford to just have a chat. Be brief with the question, please.
Okay.
Just one question.
Well, the other one is a brief comment, not so much of a question. That's Gauhar Sahab had mentioned something about sarva sambhavana or sarva sadbhavana. The thing that I wanted to mention, it's for individuals, it's good to have that. But for the state to enforce it is horrible. Sarva sadbhavana should never be touched, enforced by law or even by convention. For individuals, it's fine, because when you observe the validity of sarva sadbhavana, that means you cannot correct your own religion even. All religions need to be changed and corrected. and we should have a free hand in doing that, particularly our own. I mean, we should be free to criticize religions of even other people, but in particular our own religion. Okay, thank you very much.
Rafat, you cannot unmute yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, keeps asking me all the time. Okay, anyway, the next person is DC Chaudhary Saab, and after that, Rudranshu Singh. So please go ahead, DC Chaudhary Saab. Let me see if I have to ask him to unmute. Yes, I asked. Okay, you are good to go, Chaudhary Saab.
Mute me.
Okay, if he's not there, we will come back. Rudranshu Singh, please. Dr. Rudranshu.
Thank you, sir. My question would be the question of the theme, that what is wrong with the Hindus and the Muslims? They do not disturb the scorers of the Nobel Prize at all. What is wrong with us? Is it reserved for the Christians?
Okay, who wants to take that question? Rudranshu, please be a little more explicit.
My question is very straightforward, that if we go through the list of Nobel Prize winners, we only have the Westerners or Christians to be precise. Why so many little Hindus and so little Muslims on that list? What is wrong with us?
If
Oh,
I
yeah,
think
very
Pervez
yeah.
better, but let me pitch in. I think to Rudranshu, maybe you are being too direct, and even it is not true, it is Christians. I think the per capita Nobel Prize, the highest per capita Nobel Prize is for the Jews, but that hardly makes a difference. I mean, that is what we have been, all three speakers have been talking this evening, that you have to go to the society, and you cannot gauge the scientific temper of a society, attitude and to progress and modernity of a society just by counting the Nobel laureates. Jews have highest number of Nobel laureates, but you can find very regressive, very conservative communities among Jews. So these two are separate things. Society having a scientific temper or science keeping into is a political project, and that is why scientists are not as important as far as scientific temper is concerned. People like Jawaharlal Nehru are important, and Jawaharlal Nehru failed, as I said in my part, is because the weight of Indian civilization is heavy for him. He, carry, and it will take maybe hundreds of Jawaharlal Nehru for our society to have scientific temper the way it should have.
Okay, thank you. Raja Sekhar Saab, please go ahead, unmute yourself. I already requested.
I probably unmuted myself a little too early. I apologize for any noise I made. And I wanted to say two things. And one, I always agree with Ravi, but I have to wonder whether the assertion about Bhakti and Sufi being the source of problems in the Indian subcontinent, is it a matter of just coincidence? True,
Sorry, I
unrelated.
cannot understand what is being said. So can you write your question and send it over?
No, I'm sorry. Let me try again. I apologize. Am I any clearer now?
Yeah, there is too much of disturbance, so I at least cannot understand what you are saying.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Let's try one more time. Otherwise,
okay. I apologize. The main thing is Bhakti and Sufi. Those movements may be independent of whatever problems ail scientific temper in India. That's one point I wanted to make.
All right.
The second thing I wanted to say is something I heard. This is pertains to Pervez's point about Islamic sort of rationality not coming to the subcontinent. And I heard a talk a few years ago about the heliocentric view finally coming to the Mughal court. And what that person said was, at the same time the Mughal court was debating the heliocentric view and coming to accept it, what was going on in Jaipur in the Hindu kingdom there was this bizarre concept of, I have forgotten now what it is called, where the earth is still the center, but everything else revolves around the sun, and the sun revolves around the earth. And
Please,
that's the view that was dominant at that time. So I think it's a little bit difficult to say that Hindus are more receptive to modern ideas compared to Muslims in the subcontinent. So I'll shut up now. Thank you very much.
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you. So that was more of a comment than asking the question.
I think we should understand this thing that we have to be very brief and specific and address the question only to a particular speaker. We
Yeah.
cannot just keep on, exchanging views for a long time. It doesn't, then other person cannot talk really. Thank you.
Yeah, please avoid the comments because we have already heard those. So next person is Vanj, and then I will come with Professor Naqvi Saab. Please go ahead.
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to thank all Ravi sir, Gauhar sir, and Pervez sir for their very intriguing talk. My question is specifically to Ravi sir. So it's a very general question, which always keeps means coming into my mind. So that question is like, so basically, why is it that the theoretical physics is nowadays being means not given much of an importance, whereas for the experimental physics, so there is a lot of like funding which we have direct applications, whereas we understand one thing, that the fundamental research is equally important in comparison to the applied physics. So so can you please comment on this, because I'm basically an PhD scholar from NIT Warangal, where I work both computation as well as experimental, because my sir used to tell that if you have both the things, then it will be useful for you for getting a postdoc and higher studies. So
I will hand this question over to Pervez. He can answer it better than I can. The relative importance of theoretical physics and experimental physics.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
I don't think that you can have theoretical or experimental physics in isolation. They both need each other. Experimental physics builds upon theoretical physics, and theoretical physics derives its validation. It derives new avenues for exploration from experimental results. And all you have to do is look at astronomy and the new sort of discoveries that are being made theoretically because of the James Webb Space Telescope. There are lots of examples, but the most recent would be that. So my advice is learn as much as you can and learn everything that you learn well.
Yeah, well said.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Can I let me come in, Raji Sahab and Rafat Sahab, because I think the moderators were not fair to Professor Ramakrishnan from Columbia University when he was making his comment, and he was raising a very important point, and I realized that I made a very large scale unsubstantiated assertion that Bhakti movement and Sufi has something to do with lack of scientific temper on the subcontinent. I know that I am sticking my neck out. As someone I was asking, I have not written a book, I have not written a paper. Maybe I should elaborate on it, on what basis I am saying it. But I have been thinking about this subject for about a decade, and I haven't found much support to my take on it, generally in the people who know much more than I do about the subject. But still I stick my neck out and say that only way I can see a distinct civilization and culture on the subcontinent is this. Lot of other things go into making of the civilization and culture. It's a very complex affair, but that distinguishes from other places, because okay, Hindus are only mostly in India, but Muslims are all over the world. And yet, Islam comes to India and becomes different. South Asian Islam is very different, and its impact is very different, and it gets affected by South Asia more than, so it is different. So there is something that we have to come up with, that what is it that separates the subcontinent from everybody else? And it cannot just be only, I realize, on the religious basis, but there is a melting pot, there is churning, that is millennial churning that is going on the subcontinent, in which the religions themselves change their shape, change their body, even change their soul to some extent. So that is what I am identifying as the distinctive factor of South Asian civilization, and that I am correlating, that it's a hypothesis that I need to substantiate it, that I am correlating with the poor shape in terms of modernity, development, poverty, superstition, whichever way you put it, of the subcontinent. So it is as yet, in 20 minutes, I cannot do it. I have a lot more things to say about this, as I have been thinking about it and trying to learn about it for last 10 years. But this is all that I can say right now. I know that it is not a proven thesis. It is a unsubstantiated hypothesis yet, but it is a very plausible one in my reckoning.
Thank you. Kaisar Naqvi Saab, please.
If he is
Kaisar Naqvi.
not responding, let's move to other.
Let's see. I ask him to unmute. Please go ahead. Kaisar Naqvi Saab. There was a comment from Mirgank, Mrigank. I think he had a question. Please go ahead, Mirgank. Let me see if he's still there. No, he's gone. Okay, so Razi Bhai, I don't see. Okay, now
there are three
okay, I got
hands.
it.
Ashma Appa, Dr. Amir,
Yeah.
Tariq Farooqi, and probably.
Okay, the next person is Tariq Farooqi, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for the wonderful speeches. My question may be a little bit controversial, talking about scientific temperament. We see in the Western societies, at least, that what seems to be obvious, that their scientific temper seem to have flourished more so when religion started losing a stranglehold on the societies of the West. While in the Muslim world and in India, that has not happened. Is there a connection?
Let's ask this question to Pervez. Sorry to put you on this spot. Unmute yourself. Let me see.
Pervez, we can't hear you.
Yeah, it's on mute. Okay. Now probably I ask you to unmute. Okay.
Okay. So you can, okay, can you hear me now? Yes, it's absolutely true that modern thought. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. It's absolutely true that with the diminishing of religious orthodoxy in the West, with the reduction of the powers of the state, in powers of the church in particular, that rationality was able to assert itself in Western societies in Europe. Now, to the extent that the mullah did not control politics in the Middle Ages during the Islamic golden period, that was also true. It was when orthodoxy reasserted itself and became all powerful that science died out in Islam. And today it is having a very difficult problem in reviving itself. Now, I can give you countless examples, but here in Pakistan, for example, you cannot talk about the theory of evolution. What happened, and I'll give you this example from just a month ago. Here at the Allama Iqbal Open University, there's a lecturer in mathematics, assistant professor, in fact, who was trapped by the administration, who doesn't like him, into an argument with his students. And he asserted, this lecturer, assistant professor asserted that there was no first human being. In other words, he disputed Adam as being the first human. And, stupid fellow, I love him, but he shouldn't have got into this argument. He asked his students to prove that Islam was the best religion, just as you would prove Pythagoras' theorem. He has not only lost his job, he has lost his pension. He is now blacklisted from every job in Pakistan. And he is fortunate that they didn't take him to the police, because there he could be arrested and tried under blasphemy law 295C, for which the minimum penalty is death. So how can the scientific temper grow in a country where the laws are so draconian?
Thank you so much. Sayyid Amir Saab, and next will be the Qaisar Naqvi Saab. See if you can unmute yourself now. Sayyid Amir Saab.
So thank you. My question is addressed specifically to Professor Hoodboy. And I think you may have answered it partially in the preceding question. You raised made the very intriguing remark that in previous years, in recent years, a lot of money being spent on the university teaching and their refurbishment and all kind of equipment, but the result has been virtually no different. Do you have any thought, because there is no temper or created in the meantime to make it fruitful? And in my thought is that there is one major problem is the lack of the freedom of thought and expression, which you just elaborated upon, and that might be playing a very effective part in the whole problem. Thank you.
Well, you see, equipment is useful only if you know what you're going to do with it. Otherwise, you can just go to a scientific catalog and import this, that, and whatever, and then it lies unused in your lab. So actually, I was involved in a fight against getting a particle accelerator for use at my university. I was the head of the physics department. I didn't know that this particle accelerator had been ordered at a cost of what was 40 crore rupees then, and is probably twice or thrice that amount now. I lost that fight. That accelerator did arrive, and now 10 years later, there's nothing to show for it. There's 15 years later, in fact, there's nothing to show for it. So the point is that equipment is useful only when you have a purpose for it. And the purpose exists when you have people. And when you don't have people, then All this is junk that lies around.
Thank you, Pervez Saab. Kaisar Naqvi Saab. Kaisar Naqvi Saab, try again. I ask you to unmute. Okay, so in the meantime, he's trying. Dr. Hashma.
Okay, I just have a comment on the question on theoretical research. Since Pervez, I think Pervez gave an excellent answer, but since he mentioned the James Webb Space Telescope, I'm the deputy program scientist of James Webb Telescope, and we definitely see that as a very important component of the research. And at NASA, we have increased the funding for theoretical research based on advice from the National Academy. So I would like to tell that young man who was feeling a bit disillusioned that theoretical research is extremely important. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next person is Daya Saab.
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We seem to focus on the obvious, such as bhakti in religion. What role, as more than 2,000 years of caste, oppression, and continuing lack of education, and that people still fighting for entry into schools and colleges, what effect this has had on, in general, scientific temper, but more specifically, producing scientists in a nation of 1.3 billion people, where none of these oppressed castes have been represented. If you talk about Nobel Prize or any other such great prizes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person is Salman Qureshi Saab. I believe there was a comment.
Nobody wants to answer this? Maybe Mr. Ravi Sinha?
That's what I'm thinking that.
Yeah, I think, you make a very important point there, Sahab. Who can forget that South Asia is known for caste, and nobody else has the patent over the caste system, and our whole social fabric, our whole social structure is deeply affected by that, and I'm sure that it has played a very large role in lack of scientific temper and also lack of education and other opportunities to large part of the population. So that too, as you say, that too is obvious. The caste is obvious too. The point I was making in that caste is included, and then you have a very complex situation and you have to pick and choose depending on what question you are asking. If we are asking the question that why is the South Asian, I always call it civilization, subcontinental civilization, even though civilization is a much contested word, is in this shape, caste will be subsumed into what I am saying. Caste will be subsumed into how religion has played out. So one part, because we were talking about science today, one part that goes against reason, against science, which is antithesis of reason and science, which is this mystical, devotional kind of religion. That is what I emphasize today for the purpose of today's topic. Otherwise, if I were to elaborate, caste will play a very important role in what it has done to the Indian society, and science will play, will figure in that. Having said that, we also have to remember that as we cannot get away by blaming the British for all our ills, and as the Hindutva forces cannot really get away from blaming the Muslims and Islamic Muslim invaders for all their ills, same way, the problem that we are faced, it cannot altogether be put at the door of caste system. So it's a complex, matrix of various forces and factors and structures. And we will have to delve deeper into figuring out which has done what. The most common theme when it comes to science and scientific temper vis-a-vis the shape and soul of a civilization, is bound to come to the question of religion, because it is bound to come to the question of faith, belief, vis-a-vis argument, vis-a-vis testing, vis-a-vis questioning. So that it is in that context that I underline the Bhakti and Sufi. Hinduism having caste system, you cannot imagine Hinduism, the dominant religion on Indian part, you cannot imagine without caste system. So all the ills of Hinduism a large part of it will be put at the door of caste system when we go into the details, which religion has done what to which problem.
All right.
Thank you very
you.
much, especially since it's now being exported to other countries.
Thank you.
Can
So-
I pitch in at this level? I think the question is extremely important, that does education have a direct correlation with scientific temper or not? And in my opinion, there is no direct correlation. The quality of education, what you teach and what you don't teach, is extremely important as far as scientific temper, building scientific temper in larger society is concerned. My research shows that the ideas taught in the school permeate. They cross the boundaries of a school, and even illiterate sections of society get affected by it. Now, Pervez Sahab has very eloquently talked about education system in Pakistan. In Pakistan, if you cannot teach or talk about evolution, theory of evolution, then obviously the ideas of theory of evolution through education system will never permeate, will never cross those four walls, because they don't exist within four walls itself. In India, again, there was an incident of similar kind in Aligarh Muslim University, where a Hindu doctor was showing some slides and he made some certain remarks, and there was an outrage against him. Similarly, another person very recently talked about something he was teaching from Raman, and he is being targeted. It happened 2 days back, in fact. So in our country as well, when a minister rises up and says that I do not believe in theory of evolution and it should not be taught, and the minister was in human resource development, and he was responsible for education system, and he says that my ancestors have not seen, I have not seen gorillas and bandar, the monkeys, or any of these animals getting transformed into human beings, and therefore I don't believe it. Now, what is this education system that we are talking about? If it is regressive, if it is outmoded, if it is spreading myths and superstitions, then there is a problem. The other thing which I wanted to mention was that Nehru, as a politician, comes up with the idea of scientific temper not in vacuum. He had access to the best mind in almost every field, and so was the case with Gandhi and Patel, and these people interacted almost on a daily basis with the best minds in every field, be it poetry or literature or science, etc. And it was not confined to the boundaries. They interacted with international big scholars. And now here is a generation of politicians who have grown along with Babas in the country. They have touched their feet, and therefore it is very natural for them to attack scientific temper. Here was a prime minister who was arguing for scientific temper, and there is a prime minister today, cut to 2014, that he talks about plastic surgery. in ancient India. It's natural for them. And it's politics for them. Scientific temper was politics for Nehru. Attack on scientific temper is politics for. We are very fortunate that for a very long time in India, scientific temper debate continued. And it influenced the minds of those who were controlling the balance of power in the country. This did not happen in Pakistan. And therefore, I believe, I can't substantiate it, but I believe that in India, democracy was stable because we had a large debate on scientific temper.
All right.
And look at the countries. It is not a question of religion. Look at Myanmar. Look at Sri Lanka. These are not Muslim-dominated countries. But there was no debate on scientific temper in these countries. In Pakistan also, it did not happen. In Bangladesh also. Bangladesh, to an extent, after it became Bangladesh, there was a debate.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you so much. So, Kaisar Kazmi Saab.
Rafat, 1 second. Rafat, 1 second.
Go ahead.
Dr. Hoodboy would leave in precisely 9 minutes. So if he has to go, so if anybody wants to interact with him right now with very brief, specific questions, he can answer them. Otherwise, he will have to leave after.
Okay. Razi bhai, there is a direct question for him maybe, or Ravi Sinha. So Kaisar Kazmi Saab could not ask the question in person or verbally. So his question is, what is the role of Abul Kalam Azad in India's journey towards scientific and technological betterment?
Pervez Saab, if you want to.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is that Abul Kalam Azad was convinced, like Nehru, of the scientific temper, that in spite of a very conservative Muslim upbringing, in spite of his being revered even today by conservative people in Pakistan, because of his earlier writings, he nevertheless realized nevertheless realized that conservative Islam had to be ditched if Muslims were to move forward. The fact that he could not take the majority of Muslims with him is, I think, tragic. It results from the fact that over the centuries, orthodoxy had managed to assert itself. I won't say over the centuries, but particularly after the arrival of the British, that the divisions had become stronger, that resort had been taken to religion more and more among Muslims. That accounted for his not persevering over Jinnah. But of course, he saw with great clarity that the making of Pakistan would be a tragedy for the Muslims of India as a whole. And I think in that, his predictions turned out to be very precise. He saw Bengal as breaking away, and indeed that is what happened in 1971. I wish we had a leader in Pakistan of the caliber of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. We have had various religious figures over here, but none of them have been progressive. None of them have managed to develop the kind of support. The progressive ones have not managed to develop the kind of support that is needed to turn the country around.
Thank you. One more question, maybe for all three people, speakers, how we have to inculcate the mindset or scientific temper, rational thinking in our school education and society. This question is from Anvisha Mahakunda. So,
that should be your last answer, and after that, sir,
yeah, then we will continue. There are two more questions. So, Pervez Saab, before you leave, any input?
No, I don't think this is rocket science. You teach children the way that they are taught in countries of the West. You teach them to explore, you teach them to look for reason, you teach them not to simply believe but ask why. You teach them to be curious, and you don't burden them with heavy syllabi and curricula. You let them, at least at a young age, you let kids play with things, you let them make things with their hand, you encourage their questions. And so these are all things that go towards the making of the rational mind.
Yeah.
It's all we have to
no
look
doubt.
at.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you
no
look
doubt.
at the kind of education that's given in places like Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, then you'll see how kids are educated there as compared to kids on the subcontinent.
So Razi bhai, that would be the last question for Pervez Saab, although I will continue. Should we say thank you to Pervez
sir.
Saab now, or
Pervez साहब को thank you आप कह दें बिल्कुल sure if he wants to stay, but he looks very tired and he has to
yeah,
go.
thank you so much, Pervez. It's
Well,
always
Hoodboy, I have
thank you.
one last question. Now, you just
Yeah.
mentioned that, but it's like a catch-22. How do you teach the students all that values you just mentioned if there is no freedom? I mean, if they wouldn't allow you, whatever the government is, to have the freedom of thought, of expression, how can you do like this? So is your answer is like, as I said, catch-22.
Well, you look for niches, you look for places where you can talk about these things. And I'm afraid that, well, I was successful for the first 35 years or so. That's because my job was guaranteed as being a government employee in a government university. And the rules in our universities are so strong that even General Ziaul Haq could not have me fired, although there was a demonstration against me when I gave a talk on Islam and science. They went to Ziaul Haq, they asked that I be fired from my position. It turned out that the Jamaat-e-Islami, which had organized this demonstration, was not in the good books of the vice chancellor of that time, and so the investigation got delayed and delayed until it never happened. However, after retirement, I went and I taught at one university, got fired from there, taught at another university, got fired from there as well. And so now I've started my own little community space. It's called The Black Hole. And that's where we try to educate young people, tell them how to separate fact from fiction. And it's an ongoing enterprise, and I hope it'll keep going. Let's see.
Yeah.
All right. Can I?
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Hoodboy, and hopefully Razi bhai will invite you.
Yes.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Hello,
It's
sir.
an ongoing project. He will come.
Yeah,
again, but
thank you.
when, that is another question.
Rafat
Ji,
Sahab,
Ravi
I
sahab.
want,
Please,
wait, Rafat Sahab, I want to say in presence of Pervez, if you could hold on for 2 minutes, because this question has come, and it's the question of what to do about inculcating science and scientific temper in a society. And of course, what Pervez has said, I completely agree with that. And usually educationists and scientists, they look at the micro level, what experiments or what efforts can be made in the given situation. That is one side of the answer, and I agree with that. And yet I must point out that the way science is taught in Netherlands or wherever the best curricula are, is not a matter of designing a curricula, and is not a matter of individual educator doing something rather than wrongly. That helps, but it is possible to have those curricula and that kind of inculcation of science in the society because of the way society is. Now in India, the best teachers are going to teach the best things in the schools, and when the kids go home and kids go in the neighborhood, in the mohalla, then there is a completely different atmosphere which is going to at best, it is going to create a dual mind in that student, that, okay, when I go to school, I learn science in this way, but when I go to life, then life is something else. Science is for the school, learning in the school, in the textbooks, and so on. But life is something else. Life is Hindutva. Life is caste system. Life is, whatever the Maulvi is giving the takrir in a madrasa or masjid. So
he has to leave. He has to leave now.
Yeah. Why do you want to push him away? He is staying.
No. He
नहीं भाई जाना है. I have to go. My.
आप लोग वापस MIT आ जाइए.
No, but Ravi साहब, point is
Okay.
well taken. Point is well taken.
Okay.
I'm not pushing him away.
Right. We could talk about this all night. Okay, so I
Thank
do
you
have
so
to.
much again.
Okay,
Pervez
thank you
sir.
very much for having me. Thank you very much for having me.
Lovely
Sure.
seeing
night.
you, Pervez.
Always a
Bye.
pleasure.
Bye,
It's,
Pervez.
it's lovely to see you as well, Josna.
Okay, thank you. Salman Qureshi Saab raised hand, but he's not there in the forum. Then Iltifat Bhai, Iltifat Hassan, please.
Thank you, Rafat, and thank you all the speakers for a wonderful presentation today. I have an observation and a question. I feel that India is definitely producing very good scientists. The 5 IITs and a couple of other institutions are producing great scientists, but all the brightest of bright minds migrate to the West. And that's where the cutting research happens. I don't know how many of these top-notch scientists are coming back to India. I don't know, and that is what is required to produce top-notch, cutting-edge science research. Thank you.
I think the statistics shows that most of them don't come back to India.
Right.
At least from my batch, and I'm talking about late 70s, from IIT Delhi, only 2 of us remain in India. Rest of all my class fellows left India, and they're settled there. They've never come back to India. See, the other problem is, which has got a push after 2014, that a lot of scientific funds are being diverted to do pseudoscience. IITs are being forced to work on Panchikavya, which is Gaumotra plus all kinds of things, the products that come out of Gai. There is allocation of funds for hunting Sanjeevani booty in the country. I visited a tribal university today. There is a project there where they are trying to hunt for Sanjeevani booty in Madhya Pradesh. I know that some of the IITs, new IITs, have been given funds to hunt for Sanjeevani booty in mountain. Similarly, the mythical river called Saraswati, there is fund allocated for finding out where exactly it existed. So there is a lot of cut on scientific research funding. And whatever little bit is allocated to it, now after 2014, a lot of it is going to pseudoscience. So there is a problem that we are facing in India, a severe problem.
Thank you. Tahir Mahmood Saab, please go ahead. And after that, there will be a last question from Satynath Saab, although he has already asked the question. Go ahead, Tahir Mahmood Saab. I ask you to unmute. Tahir Saab. Okay, let's go back to Satynath Chaudhary Saab. So please be brief.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that we know that whatever learning we get, whatever thoughts we get, whatever habits we get early in our childhood, get embedded into what is known as subconscious mind. And it's very, very difficult to change that. So in view of that, why don't we, and knowing that all religions have some garbage in them. So, so why not keep argue in favor of keeping the children away from any religious habits, thinking, or whatever. So when they become a little bit of rational people, a little more logical people, then they should be exposed to all religions and let them accept whatever they feel like.
Thank you, Satyanath.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Jabbar is next.
Okay. Thank you. Remarkable discussion today. Enjoyed it. So I have the economic paradigm shift. Industrial revolution really had a major impact in terms of the organization of the societies. So that, I think, it didn't come out in the discussion. So can you really talk about that? Also, the US context, you have the separation of state and church. There is a lot of societies, it's intermingled. The society, the state and religious traditions are intermingled. There is no separation. So these 2 points, I think probably an hour is very late, I think. If you can briefly talk about them, I think it would be great. Thank you.
Yes, if I could come in. Great question, Jabbar Sahab. The economic paradigm, the role of industrial revolution is the one that is most talked about in the literature. Libraries are full of that, because one explanation of what is known as great divergence. How did in the middle of 19th century, around 1850 or so, Western Europe just took off and left all the other countries and civilizations behind. And the major causality that is found is industrial revolution. So I did not spend time on that because Raji Sahab gives only 20 minutes, So, but it's the, that is very much there. That is very much there. I didn't want to repeat it. And yet, what gets lost in this economic paradigm is that the seeping in of science and the way economic paradigm also requires a social cultural foundation to flourish, that does not get highlighted, in very often in the literature. So the social cultural civilizational dimension, of course, you cannot separate the system part, the economic paradigm part from the cultural civilizational part. But in order to understand, we scientists always separate things, categorize things and try to see the interrelationship. So I think that the changing of the social mind is a much more complex problem, much more difficult problem compared to bringing industrial revolution to a society. So even today, for example, the rise of China is explained only in terms of the economic part, the way it has become the workshop of the world. But that does not explain its rise, because 10 years ago, when we were talking about China being just the workshop of the world because of cheap labor, now one should go to China and see they are doing the best science. They are building the biggest accelerator single-handedly, not like CERN, where many European countries participated. They are building an accelerator which is 100 times more powerful by themselves. They are establishing international space station. And they are, India talks about 5 or 10 IITs. They have 400 such IIT level of institutions, and their scientific output has just skyrocketed. So that cannot be explained only on the basis of economic paradigm like being the workshop of the world. There has to be a social soil to support industrial revolution. There has to be a social soil to turn economic prosperity into a civilizational gain and a great civilizational future. That is happening on very few places in the world. West has been one, and I dwelt upon it, how it was, an accident that science and modernity and everything was born there. For whatever reason it was born there, it helped them take off. And in that, you have to underline the effect of enlightenment as much as industrial revolution. Because without enlightenment, Western societies could not have become what they have become, and they could not have used industrial revolution very well. Japan did that, and very few other societies have done that. So that's a very big question. And when this great divergence gets talked about, why did West move ahead of everybody, leaving everybody behind? Only industrial revolution and science is, but then, people have pointed out very well that the scientific revolution needed those four things, Barud, Barud is what in English, what do we call, the Nobel invented that, dynamite. So dynamite, and paper and printing press, and one more thing. Four things they point out for the European scientific industrial revolution, and all those four things were invented in China first in 14th and 15th century. So the four pillars of modern scientific technological revolution, they were all invented in China, and China was left behind and Europe took off. What that tells us? That something else much more important was happening in Europe, which started with the splitting of Christianity, birth of Protestantism, the debate about religion, whether Pope is the final authority or people have their own access to God, Luther's 99 points, all those things starting from that to Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, and then finally Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, the whole Bach, the entire French philosophers. It was a long 200-year-long process. It was not just capitalism and industrial revolution.
We need a whole day for
Thank you.
need a whole day introduction with you. Entire
Okay,
day.
thank you so much. And the last call for Tahir Mahmood Saab. I know he's there, but probably he cannot unmute yourself.
He has done that.
Now he's okay. It says mute. Tahir Mahmood Saab.
Last question.
That's the last. Tahir Mahmood Saab.
No, I think.
Okay. So Razi bhai, before I hand over to you, thank you to all three speakers. And it was certainly a lecture or session of interest, because I could see there are more than 120 people showed up. And it was indeed a very interesting lecture. And I wish I could talk more about religion and the science, which I avoid the subject, but there are some comments about that, and I really don't agree with that. But anyway, thank you so much. And science and religion.
Thank you, Rafat. Thank you. But before we end up, just a mini question to my fellow colleague and my friend Gauhar Raza Saab. Specifically, since you were born and raised and lived your all entire adult life at Aligarh, and Aligarh, the culture, its contradiction, its strength, everything. So within this India, when other institutions, certainly some institutions have prospered and done better than Aligarh, nonetheless, Aligarh is a huge place and a lot of potential. And obviously, it still remains the center of Muslim intellectual, intellectualism or wisdom. What do you think? Why, in spite of having all resources at their disposal, and this consciousness also that once we were great thinkers and we are not, and Islam or religion could be a reason impairing this situation, why they are still unable and not becoming the number one in the country in spite of having all resources and all consciousness? But what is still there lacking?
Razi bhai, this question of yours requires another probably full-fledged
I knew that.
discussion. Yeah, it is a complex problem, and it's a very important question that you have asked.
It is.
But it does require another full-fledged discussion. But my experience of Aligarh was that when I was in Aligarh, we cursed that this doesn't happen and that doesn't happen and this is not progressing and that is not happening. But when I compare it with other universities, when I came out of it, and luckily I came to one of the best institutions called IIT Delhi, where the funds were flowing like water as compared to Aligarh. In fact, the lab in which I did my master's had the same budget as the entire engineering college of Aligarh, Zakir Hussain Engineering College, where I studied, had. It was remarkable, 88,000 per year at that time, and the entire college. One of the things that has always gone in favor of Aligarh Muslim University is that the classes are held regularly, very sincerely and seriously by teachers and attended by students. So if you compare it with Allahabad University, if you compare it with Lucknow University, if you compare it with Agra University or Meerut University, Aligarh Muslim University definitely stands out in the entire belt of UP. Having said that, it has not really encouraged in most of the departments first-rate research. There were islands. At one point of time, mathematics department was doing remarkable work. History department did very good work. Remarkable teachers were there, including Professor Irfan Habib. So was the case with physics department of Aligarh. But by and large, university could not create a culture where first-rate cutting-edge research would be done in almost all departments. And I think that has been the greatest weakness.
That is the question, right? Is that not the question?
Can I throw my hat in the ring, sir?
Sure.
That's what I'm saying. It requires, there are many dimensions. It requires
another session. It requires another session.
The thing is, sir, that we are not inclined for research, and the politicians are inclined to establish new institutions and let the old ones go to hell. For example, I can give you the example of law. Lucknow University Law Faculty has produced presidents of India, chief justices of India, and it was one of the finest law institution in the country once. But we are more inclined to open national law universities. Now, National Law University at the end of the day is a single faculty university, which has 10 times more fund than all the faculties combined of Lucknow University have, which includes the science faculty, which includes the arts faculty, which includes the history faculty. So there is a big disbalance of funding, and we are obsessed with the so-called super specialty institutions. But those super specialty institutions are at the end of the day single faculty institutions.
Okay,
now,
we understand.
That system isn't followed in Canada or US.
But here under one roof. Yeah, I understand. Here, it doesn't fit your description. Aligarh still remains the most funded institution of the country. Can you believe that? So there is no shortage of money there. There is no shortage of resources. Aligarh gets so much money that in that poor country, you cannot imagine how much that campus gets. And it has all the resources. It is not becoming what it can become. That is the question for another session, I guess. Raza Sahab, you are going to take this bait for a session?
It will be a good idea, yeah.
And Ravi Sinha Sahab has already said that.
Because I may not agree with you that it is the most funded university in the country.
right now. Yeah.
There are other institutions which are like
Well, there was-
IIT.
No,
have-
IITs are still very limited in resources because they are focused on that. There was a debate within why BHU got a little bit more than Aligarh, because then it came into picture that Aligarh really has a lot of budget, and they use it very nicely. It's not that they abuse the budget, but they produce the output is the problem.
Razi bhai, the funding is one of the issue. I agree with that.
Absolutely.
But the mindset
is the issue.
among Indian scientists is, okay, it's not from the beginning, it's not the freedom of thought that we always talk about. And there is a target, oh, I have to get the PhD, I have to earn that, and I have to become a professor. There is nothing like I have to excel in my field. So that mindset is missing in India, in the entire India. That is what the entire session is based on. Why don't we have the Nobel Prize?
Because we are a Naukri-centric society.
Exactly. So that is what my point is.
The IITs have become feeders to the bureaucracy.
Yeah, and IIT
instead
system,
of being feeders of the scientist community, they have become feeders to produce district collectors.
Well, that's okay. That's okay.
From IIT and I retired as cabinet
it's a complex
secretary.
problem. Let's give it a much deeper thought.
It's very complex, and unless as somebody and Pervez was talking and others was talking, that we have to inculcate from the beginning, from the childhood, the freedom of thought, and keep the religion and science separate if we want to indulge in science.
So separate session will be needed. And सिन्हा साहब, आप किस चीज से खुश होंगे? कितना टाइम आपको चाहिए एक सेशन के लिए?
1 hour.
Then we can be very careful how to put it, because it looks like you want to say things.
No, I don't want any time. I am not fond of speaking.
No, I didn't mean that. What I meant, how much is the better time?
I keep thinking and learning. That's a way of saying these subjects are such that they will require much longer discussion and much thought. And often when these questions are posed, the most difficult questions are those for which everybody has an answer.
Yeah.
That is.
भाई next session में रवि साहब का कुछ राशन बढ़ाइए आप, कम से कम 30 मिनट करिए.
Actually, the best thing would be that all the speakers should also bring a lot of scholars and professors from wherever their influence is, so that the participation really becomes more fruitful. And today there is no doubt. Today at least there were 50-60 names that since I write them, who came from university as a professors or as a senior scientist and all those. There were a lot really. And some of them wrote to me, like my own colleague who is a very senior scientist at ISC Bangalore, Dipankar Chatterjee, is a Padam Shri, whatever, all those. But he said that I'm just traveling, couldn't get connected. He wanted to join. So there were many others. So we can enlarge the participation, put one focus thing on science. Unfortunately, we are so much overwhelmed by issues on civil rights, this and that takes our more time. And science people see that, oh, it is a dry subject. Why we don't understand that, we don't talk about scientific experiment here. We talk about scientific temper, we talk about reason, rationality. People are scared of all these things. Because then, do you know that for this session, people especially are, all three are scientists, all three are very progressive. What they're going to talk? They are going to denounce religion. I mean, look at this. And the question, the guys who asked these questions were very educated people. I mean, what you can say there?
Razi bhai, why to mix both together? They are two separate things. And
they're not two
people
separate
always,
things. They are the problem. That is the problem. They're not
because
two
they
separate.
always think the science cannot be, science cannot run without religion, and religion can survive without science.
Come on, you know.
That's what the, no, I saw the comments. I saw the comments.
Yeah, I understand. I understand. But you see, I am at NIH since almost what, 42 years. All are almost 98% are Christians, to 1% are Jews or our Indian and all that. Nobody ever talks about religion at all. They may be practicing, maybe they're going to church. Nobody ever talks about politics unnecessarily, unless there is a lunch time, right? And they just talk normal thing about, you know, curious thing, reason, with rational thing, all this. Nobody talks about any other thing. But most of them are very liberal, very liberal. And it's not that they're atheists, they're practicing. I think they go to church, probably they go to synagogue, but they don't take it, or that if you go to Indian institutions, you talk to, you know, any department, any office, religion, politics, science, in science departments. This is no other thing. This is total reverse. Anyway, Raza Saab,
राजी साहब, राजी साहब,
बहुत हो गया.
मेरे सजेशन पर
चले जाए वरना ये लोग छोड़ेंगे नहीं आपको. आप चले जाइए प्लीज.
मेरे सजेशन पर किसी ने कमेंट नहीं किया, थोड़ा करने दीजिए.
नहीं सुन लीजिए सत्यनाथ जी, राजा साहब किसी और कॉन्फ्रेंस में है. इसको उनको इंडिया में बहुत लेट हो चुका है. लेट देम लीव. और आप अपना बोल लीजिए, लेकिन लेट देम. आप चाहते हैं कि सुभाष जी कुछ बोलते हैं आपके जवाब में? वो बैठे हुए हैं.
ये अगर नहीं बोलना चाहते तो
अरे वो थक गए भाई, उनको उनका भी कुछ ऑक्सीजन की
सिर्फ ये माफी मांगना चाहता हूँ कि वहां भी लोग वेट कर रहे हैं.
हाँ बिल्कुल
कॉन्फ्रेंस.
शराफत में मार खा गए, शराफत में मार खा के बहुत देर तक बेचारे. थैंक यू वेरी मच राजा साहब. प्लीज
बहुत शुक्रिया. आदाब सबको.
बहुत शुक्रिया.
बेहद अच्छा लगा मुझे इस प्लेटफॉर्म पे आने के लिए दोबारा से.
थैंक यू सर.
आप बोल रहे हैं, आप तीसरी बार है बोल रहे हैं. मैं आपको 30 बार लाऊंगा इंशाल्लाह. ओके, थैंक यू. पुराना साथ है भाई, पुराना साथ है. थैंक यू वेरी मच. और
तो रजी भाई, अलीगढ़ में इतना सब कुछ होने के बावजूद एक चीज जो है, हम लोग जब पीएचडी कर रहे थे तो कभी हमने रिलीजियस इन्फ्लुएंस जो है साइंस पर नहीं देखा. मतलब जो है, जैसे कि लोग समझते हैं कि भाई अलीगढ़ है तो अलीगढ़ में जो है रिलीजन का इन्फ्लुएंस होगा. देयर वाज नेवर ए टॉक अबाउट रिलीजन on doing research. Nobody, I mean, even the hardcore mullahs were not against doing research in Aligarh. At least that is a
true. आपको मैं बताऊं, I think especially एड्रेस में कर रहा हूं इनको, रवि सिन्हा साहब को. The issue here is not as much religion. आप एक चीज को मॉनिटर करें. Where is Rafat? Gone? अच्छा है. देखिए, there is a fundamental difference. आप हमारे सबके घरों में देखिए बचपन से, if I can say in Urdu Hindi, if that is more better saying, what we really, our parents, remember our parents, जो हम लोग इतने छोटे थे, पढ़ो, अच्छे मार्क्स लाओ, फिर अच्छे स्कूल जाओ, अच्छे में एडमिशन लो, and अच्छा जॉब करो. I mean, what is this process? This process has created a person without a wholesome person, जिसको और कुछ नहीं, nothing that person knows, because parents with all good wishes or the uncles, they told only one thing, never told be a good person. I mean, this language doesn't flourish from that, the same time. Good person, ethics, morality, chori kya hai, don't lie, your responsibility outside your house as a good citizen, and create, ask question, don't be angry or don't be scared, be curious. These words are never in the vocabulary. Rather, padho, read, study. Don't look at the TV or don't do this thing. Do this thing so that you can get admitted. This get admitted, get into the other ladder, get into that has made us this. See what happens when we come here at 28 or 25 or 30. The same Indian brain, frustrated, fully trained, frustrated in India, unaccomplished. When gets into this atmosphere, gets an atmosphere, and then shines. You see, the same brain comes here, cannot perform that good in India, while in India, in Bombay, even in Delhi, the same IITians or PhDs. Bring them here in the West, they get atmosphere. And they see this strong, really urge and the challenge and the curiosity and then aggressive approach to inquiry, why it is like this. This attitude changes them, and that's why those Khuranas or Chandrasekhars and others got it here. And once they get the prize, we claim them that it is us that created the mind.
सर
So,
एक इंडियन मैथमेटिशियन का नाम हम लोग भूल रहे हैं, वशिष्ठ नारायण सिंह.
अरे भाई कोई भी we are not
वो
talking
अमेरिका
about
से.
What I'm saying is the attitude. It comes from our own houses. We forget and blame.
Please let me complete. He returned to India and he died as a pauper.
I was not letting you complete because you just jumped in. So that is another way of not, you could have stopped, and once one person is finished, you could have come in. So that was the reason, okay? We were already conversing.
Okay, Rudranshu, you can talk after that.
Yeah, say now.
Go.
Vashishth Narayan Singh came back to India. He died as a pauper and he died as a mentally disturbed person.
Well, that is
He was a mathematician par excellence.
Yeah.
And he died as a pauper.
Yeah, but well, that is not the issue.
The thing is that we systematically kill inquisitiveness. We are not allowed.
No, we don't kill. We never produce. We never encouraged it. There is no inquisitiveness there.
Yeah,
Razi
Razi
sahab,
bhai, there.
Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next meeting then. I have to
Yeah.
leave now.
Thank you.
सिन्हा साहब, आप क्या सूफियों को सुनेंगे?
बिल्कुल सुनेंगे. ये जल्दी में एक बार फिर टाइम का सवाल उठाएं. जल्दी में गलतफहमी पैदा हो गई है. मैंने जो कहा, मैं रिलीजन कर रहा हूं, मैं रिलीजन को काउंटर पोज ही नहीं कर रहा हूं. मैं ये कह रहा हूं कि सोसाइटी में जो कल्चर है, रिलीजन उसका बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा है और साइंस है. तो जो एक यूनिक साइंस है, उसका कल्चर से जो इंटरेक्शन होगा, उसमें रिलीजन भी आएगा और बहुत सारी चीजें आएंगी. ये एक के खिलाफ दूसरे को खड़ा करने का मसला नहीं है. ये मसला ये है से समझा जाए.
बिल्कुल.
Yeah, you are right. Exactly.
चलिए, बिल्कुल वो बात नहीं है. कोई कंफ्यूजन नहीं.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. See you next time.
सर, आपके लिए तो हाजिर है, जब चाहें आप. तो we will do and again a session.
नहीं, मैं बोलने की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ, मैं सुनने की बात कर रहा हूँ. आपकी हर मीटिंग
सुनेंगे भी, बोलेंगे भी भाई. वो रफत तो आपको भूलते ही नहीं है. वो तो अगर आप नहीं दिखाई देते तो आपका नाम ले लेते हैं.
ठीक है. थैंक यू.
रजी और रफत, एक चीज मैं भी अर्ज करना चाह रहा हूँ.
सना साहब, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
आप लोग मेरे ख्याल से इंडिया की साइंटिफिक प्रोग्रेस के बारे में ज्यादा पेसिमिस्टिक हैं. मैं इंडिया को देख रहा हूँ कि ये जो रास्ता है ना, इंडिया जो ले रहा है, ये कुछ थोड़ा बहुत चाइना का है. देखिए, आप चाइना में कटिंग एज रिसर्च नहीं हो रही थी, लेकिन स्लोली जैसे जैसे सोसाइटी ने वहाँ की प्रॉस्पर किया, तो उन्होंने अपने जो जो चाइनीज माइंड्स हैं, अच्छे चाइनीज माइंड्स, उनको वापस बुलाना शुरू किया जो वेस्ट में ट्रेंड थे। और अब चाइना में मेरे ख्याल से टॉप नॉच रिसर्च हो रही है। टू सम एक्सटेंट जापान में ये पहले हो चुका था। इंडिया आई थिंक इज हेडिंग इन दैट डायरेक्शन कि जैसे आपका कंट्री और सोसाइटी प्रॉस्पर करेगी, तब ये वापस जाएंगे ये लोग। बिजनेस में ये ऑलरेडी हो गया है। इंडिया अब बिजनेस में इस वक्त इंडिया से दोनों रास्ते हैं, लोग आते हैं वेस्ट और वापस भी जाते हैं, और बड़ा एक डायनामिक बिजनेस एटमॉस्फेयर वहां हो गया है। आई थिंक एकेडेमिया विल फॉलो सून।
एकेडमिया का जानते हैं, उसका मसला यही हुआ कि यही मसला है। इंडिया का अपना एक ट्रेडिशन बहुत पुराना है स्कॉलरशिप का, और डीप फिलोसफिकल वो है लर्निंग का। लेकिन वो जो माहौल की बात हो रही है ना, जब तक कि टेम्पर जो है साइंटिफिक एक कल्चर डेवलप आप नहीं करेंगे, वहां रिसोर्स की कोई कमी नहीं है। अगर आप जाते हैं तो वहां नहीं जाते जो बड़े इंस्टीट्यूशन। अगर जरा आप आईएससी बेंगलोर जाइए या आईआईटीज के कैंपसेस देखिए, या बनारस को देखिए, अलीगढ़ को देखिए, उन कैंपसेस के रिसोर्सेस को देखिए। दे डोंट लैक एनीथिंग, neither the degree nor the experience nor the instruments, nothing. वहां का सबसे बड़ा मसला जो है, तो चाइना की बात नहीं हो रही है, वहां तो नेहरू वगैरह ने और पूरे ग्रुप ने इतना बना दिया था कि, लेकिन जो लैक कर रहा है वो वहां का खुद जो एकेडमिया है उसके अंदर वो अर्ज कि भाई वी हैव टू चेंज आवर सेल्फ इन थिंकिंग, टेकिंग चैलेंजेस, इंक्वायरिंग और डूइंग सम ओरिजिनल थिंग। वो चीज वो डेवलप उनको करनी है। दे डोंट नीड एनी फिजिकल थिंग, फिजिकल के लिए बहुत उनके पास है।
रजी भाई, चाइना हैज कट द ब्यूरोक्रेसी, इन इंडिया स्टिल परवेसिव। ब्यूरोक्रेसी जब तक खत्म नहीं,
बात करते हैं, कोई वो नहीं है, अकाउंटेबिलिटी नहीं है। आप जाओ अपने अलीगढ़ में जाइए, कोई बैठ करके 4-4 घंटा बात क्यों करते हो? तुम लोग बैठ के बात करते हो, और उसमें रिसर्च करनी चाहिए उसकी। जब बात कर रहे हैं आप, शाम को टहलते हुए चले जा रहे हैं, मतलब यू हैव टू वर्क वेरी हार्ड।
नहीं रजी, मैं जो बात कर रहा था वो रिसोर्सेज की बात नहीं थी। रिसोर्सेज तो आपको हमारे, आप पाकिस्तान जाए वहां भी ये होते हैं ना, ये इंस्ट्रूमेंटेशन वगैरह आपको नजर आ जाएगा। मेरा तो मकसद ये है कि जो आपके वेरी बेस्ट ब्रेन्स जो वेस्ट में आए हैं,
नहीं सब थोड़ी आएंगे, सब नहीं आए हैं भाई। अरे पीनट की तरह आए हैं, सब कैसे चले जाएंगे?
नहीं सब नहीं, मैं कह रहा हूँ कि जाना शुरू करेंगे। जैसे चाइना एक 10-15 साल पहले जो चाइनीज आते थे अच्छे साइंटिस्ट, वो यहाँ रहते थे। अब दे आर गोइंग बैक, क्योंकि उनके लिए ज्यादा कंड्यूसिव हो रहा है माहौल, प्रॉस्पेरिटी वाइज। ये इंडिया इज जस्ट आई थिंक 10 to 15 years बिहाइंड दैट ट्रेंड।
तो आपको ये बता दूं कि जितने भी इंस्टीट्यूशन वहां हैं, जिसमें भी उनकी फैकल्टी है, वो सब यहाँ से 5 साल 8 साल 10 साल बाद गए हैं। ऐसा नहीं कि वो एक साल बाद गए या वहीं से प्रोड्यूस हुए हैं। All these professors, all these people that you see in various institutions there, they are all gone from West. वो आते हैं पीएचडी के बाद 4 साल 6 साल, एनआईएस से कम 50 आदमियों को मैं जानता हूँ, who are there after 10 years और 15 years के बाद भी गए, जब पोजीशन जैसे से मिलती गए। बट वंस दे आर देयर, दे आर नॉट प्रोड्यूसिंग, इसलिए कि माहौल वहां चेंज हो जा रहा है। माहौल का वहां पे बहुत बड़ा असर है। मसलन ये है कि वहां बैठ के वही होता माहौल है, यहाँ वो माहौल उनको जो इनकरेज करता है टू एक्सेल, टू कम्पीट, वहां वो कोई इशू नहीं हो रहा। तो ये एक बहुत बड़ा मसला है। लेकिन वो सब के सब फैकल्टीज जो है ज्यादातर यही की प्रोड्यूस है। जैसे हमारे साथी हैं, कम से कम 8, 10, 15 को मैं जानता हूँ जो हायर पोजीशन पे वहां हैं या रिटायर हो रहे हैं। लेकिन बात बड़ी करेंगे, लेकिन आई डोंट सी कि
वो भी जो जाते हैं यहाँ से वो भी ब्यूरोक्रेसी में इन्वॉल्व हो जाते हैं।
वही तो कह रहा हूँ अब देखो यहाँ पे जब वो
अब
चौधरी
आपके
चौधरी था, आयरा पास्टन के साथ चौधरी था,
वही मैं कहने वाला था।
तीन पेपर नेचर में उसके 3 पेपर थे। उसके बाद इसका मतलब उसका ब्रेन तेज था, फंक्शनल था, लेकिन यहाँ का माहौल उसको एक्सेल करा रहा था। वहां गया, उसको बड़ी सी गद्दी पे बैठा दिया, हर चीज का चेयरमैन बना दिया। अब उसको फुर्सत ही नहीं है, इधर उधर खाली वो स्पीच दे रहा, नतीजे तो फिर दिस इज हाउ इट गोज।
ओके, ग्रेट।
चलो बहुत ज्यादा हो गया, थैंक यू। हमारे यहाँ पे बहुत सीनियर, हमसे भी 15 ईयर्स सीनियर हमारी डिपार्टमेंट की प्रोडक्ट हैं, डॉक्टर कल्पना चक्रवर्ती। शी इज नॉट सेइंग एनीथिंग बट शी ऑलवेज जॉइंस अस, सो थैंक यू फॉर बीइंग हियर। ओके, बाय, खुदा मिलेंगे फिर अगले हफ्ते। थैंक यू, थैंक यू। अगले हफ्ते वो है भाई, सूफियों का है, बैठिएगा। आप तो बदायूं के हैं यार, आपका तो सूफियों से बड़ा कनेक्शन है।
अरे जनाब, अगले हफ्ते भी बैठेंगे, और कल 11 बजे सुबह है ना मुशायरा?
हाँ, मेरे ख्याल से 11 बजे, मुझे याद नहीं।
ठीक है,
ऑल राइट।